Now then, my name is Ryan Central, and today I have a little bit more information on how Borderlands' endgame is going to look, as well as post-launch content. This came from an interview with Chris Brock, who is one of the lead developers/producers on Borderlands 3, and I got to sit down with him last week. First things first, I wanted to talk about how Borderlands was planning to change along with the looter-shooter genre. It's been a while since we saw a Borderlands game, and in that time we've had Destiny, Anthem, Division, all of these games focusing on that constantly updating, always online game as a service type. Are we expecting something similar with this new version of Borderlands?
So it's interesting because we've definitely looked at those games, and we definitely want to understand what people like about them, what people don't like about them. We play those games. We got a lot of Destiny fans, we got a lot of Division fans, right? 2012 was a long time ago. The last time we had a numbered Borderlands was 2012. And so what it means to be a shooter in 2019 versus 2012 is people expect you to move more effectively, right? People expect you to have weapons that feel very visceral and impactful and stuff like that. So I think we've seen that. Borderlands 1 and to an extent 2 were lucky to come out during an era where endgame was not as critical, right? And we've looked at some of those games and okay, well, clearly endgame is a thing we need to worry about, right? It's a thing that we need to we know people will come play the game. So one of the things that we've looked around the landscape and not changed is we're okay, well, we still really like our loot formula. It's still really important to us that okay, we killed this guy, he dropped a gun. I can go look at that gun, I can see where that is, I can pick it up, and I can equip it, use it right now, right? We don't want to change that for anything. We like our narrative structure, we like our mission structure. But there are things that we look around okay, well, this is what we are, that's what they are. It's not a zero-sum game. You can like both games, right? So we don't want to just conform to that. We want to be what Borderlands is. But yeah, so split screen's a big deal to us, right? 4-player co-op's a big deal to us. 4 distinct Vault Hunters is a big deal to us, right? There are things about the franchise that are part of its DNA, and you don't want to get away from that. But at the same time, we would be insane to not look around and be okay, well, times are different, expectations are different, and we need to accommodate that.
Seeing as Chris mentioned Endgame, I thought I'd poke that bear a little bit.
I can't get super in depth, but I can say that there are multiple axes that you can play Endgame on, right? There is the classic, I would like to go do New Game Plus, play through 2, right? That is definitely a thing. But we also know that there are people that want to be able to grind. They just want to go grind the loot. They want to go we've all played Diablo. We like to run rifts too, right? So it's we know that we want there to be a light context, easily repeatable, escalating difficulty kind of thing. We know that's a thing we want. Just understanding that there's different kinds of people that endgame means different things to, right? And then making sure that at launch we have something that we're happy with, and then making sure that post-launch we continue to add to that so that no one can say we're not paying attention to them. So
you mean rifts in Diablo, that kind of
sure,
something of that caliber?
I mean, I don't want to compare it directly to that because it's not exactly that, and I can't get into too many specifics still. But the idea that hey, you know what I really want to do right now? I don't really want to do a mission. I don't really want to do a story. What I really want to do is go fight some guys and get some loot. That is a really powerful thing, and we've seen that. We understand that.
So I was really excited to hear the Greater Rift kind of content. It sounds super interesting, and to be honest, I think it would suit Borderlands really well. Horde modes have always been a popular sort of game mode in various different games, so it'd be nice for Gearbox to make a grind mode that is similar to what a Greater Rift would be. I mean, in previous Borderlands games, we've had those in an arena fight multiple rounds in the past, so maybe it's something like that with a difficulty modifier, or just a big zone that you can run around to make sure to kill everybody in. I think that'd be a really cool thing to add. Next up, when we had the game test, we played Pandora, very early game in the game test, and in the story, you move on to Promethea afterwards. I asked if in any part of the campaign or in the end game would we actually return to Pandora either to do repeatable missions or other end game kind of content.
So as far as repeatable missions and stuff, so we've had some stuff that we're going to talk about soon. We have, I think Gamescom, we're going to talk about some stuff specifically that fits very neatly into what you're describing. We have missions that are runnable. it was important to us to make sure that our bosses are runnable. Like we do want people to be able to go replay the sections of content they like, but we do not have we don't have full replay this mission anytime you want. We don't have that with every mission. There are missions that do allow you to do that, and within the context you will find them that will make sense. But not every mission you can just rerun and rerun. But we've tried to make sure that there is content that you can rerun and rerun. So.
There's a lot of new stuff coming in the new Borderlands game, all sorts of different changes and all sorts of big news that we've already got so far. I wanted to ask Chris, what was an area that he felt wasn't highlighted enough that he really wanted to drill down and say, this is a really cool thing that we added?
Level sync is one of these features we kind of talk about, and it almost gets kind of passed over. It's not necessarily the sexiest back of the box marketing feature, but the most common thing we hear from players is hey, I had a group and they out-leveled me, and now I can't play with them anymore, and I'm lost. And either they can wait, or I can abandon my job and try to catch up. But we're out of sync now, right? And being able to have that not be the case, we can make that work. We can do that math for you, so that you're level 20, I'm level 30. To you, everything feels like level 20. To me, everything feels like level 30. We both feel very effective. It doesn't feel like I'm breaking the game. It doesn't feel like you're holding me back, right? That's a pretty big deal. That's one of those things that I almost think that we're underselling, because it's that was one of our single biggest problems with Borderlands. So, it's cool, we fixed that. So.
Are there certain limitations to that, I assume, where the lower level person who would be most likely farther early into the story wouldn't be thrown into mid-story missions and stuff? Or
so it depends on who's the host, right? So if I'm level 30 and I'm hosting the game and you're level 1 and join me, you can do that. You can join me at whatever part of the story that I'm at, right? When you go back to your game, you will start at the beginning. You'll go through, and then when you get to the part that you already played with me, you'll be offered the option to either skip that because you've already played it, or you can continue to play it again because you want to play your story continuously, right? We try to give you that option.
With Chris mentioning before that in the end of the campaign you could do New Game Plus or do other stuff, I wanted to ask, going off previous Borderlands games, we'll probably finish the main campaign around level 30 to 35. I wondered with this new endgame mode or whatever it is, the Greater Rift kind of mode, whether you can level to 50 just doing that.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we do want to have different kinds of end game that speak to different kinds of people, right? So if I never want to do a second playthrough, I still want to be able to level up to 50. So I will be allowed to do that.
Borderlands has always had a pretty well-defined way of doing post-launch content. DLCs are a firm example of that. In the time between Borderlands 2 and now, we've had all sorts of games, not even in the looter-shooter genre, Overwatch, Fortnite, basing their success off constantly updating the game to keep people interested. I wondered if Borderlands 3 was going to be doing a similar thing there.
So far as post-launch content goes, we're still going to do some of the stuff Gearbox is known for, which is large expansion content that is very worth the value, right? Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep was $10, right? That's longer than a lot of games, right? So we still want to do that kind of thing. Also, we know that for your game to thrive in this day and age, that you've got to continuously engage the community with also free things, right? You don't necessarily, we want the game to evolve and change and kind of feel like it's alive, but we also don't want to become a games as a service game for Borderlands. We don't want to do that for Borderlands because we want Borderlands to still be Borderlands. So it's trying to kind of hit that balance.
Next, I wanted to talk about raid bosses, or just general bosses in the game of Borderlands. We've had raid bosses in Borderlands 2 as an example, and with games like Destiny really basing their end game around raid mechanics like that, I wondered if Borderlands 3 might be doing a similar thing there, or not.
Yeah, I'm actually really, really proud of where the bosses have gotten to in the game. Our lead boss designer is a guy named Matt Cox, and he's really helped us out here tremendously. I think this is gonna sound weird. Shooters are not the best genre for boss fights, right? There's not as much you can do with since you don't have full kind of environmental awareness. You can see this FOV in front of you, right? Mm-hmm. Because of that, it's easy for bosses to turn into I'm going to shoot this boss a lot. These big bullet sinks, right? Mm-hmm. I'm really happy with how much of a strength boss fights have been for us. Like, I think we do boss fights very, very well. And yeah, like you said, there's a lot of them. It goes from, and there's everything from like a badass with a name, right? You know, like just kind of a little boss, all the way up to like giant. I don't even want to hit because there's things that are just enormous that you're gonna fight. So.
I mentioned Destiny, and with Chris saying that shooters don't really have good raid mechanics, I brought up the exception of Destiny with standing on certain platforms, doing certain bits and pieces. I wondered if we're going to see that in Borderlands 3.
I mean, we definitely have looked at that stuff and seen what they've done. For the core game, it's tricky because you definitely want to have content that you can do by yourself and content that you can do with other people. So if you have a boss where the mechanic is like, cool, 3 of us are going to stand over here on these very specific spots, or we're going to like bounce aggro back and forth, like that stuff's awesome, but it doesn't work when you're a solo player, right? And you know, making every boss have like kind of a solo mode and a not solo mode is a pretty massive undertaking, right? So insofar as like super deep boss mechanics go, like raid style, not so much. Though, I mean, there's always room in the future to do lots of stuff like that. So.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I tend to play multiplayer games like Borderlands, like Destiny, even Anthem and The Division, solo, for the most part at least. I will matchmake into certain content, so I wondered what life would be like as a player that tends to play solo in a multiplayer game.
So, I mean, if you want to play the whole game solo, that's definitely a thing you can do. But we've tried to make matchmaking as like frictionless as possible. Like you can go to the pause screen and just matchmake with your friends. You can do that from a zone transition, right? Like if you go up to one of the zone lines, you can basically hit Y or triangle, and it will show you like your friends that are in that zone. You can just join them from there, right? Just trying to make sure that that stuff is just as easy as possible. We've also done a lot with. We've noticed that people are not talking on headsets as much as they used to, right? So trying to make sure that people can non-verbally communicate better. So we have a ping system, we have an emote system, so that you can just you can do like a rudimentary communication and get the gist. Like I can go ping a red chest and like, cool, you see that too. We'll both get some loot. I can ping that badass. Cool, he's highlighted for you. Now we can both focus fire on that guy, right? So. Trying to just make all that stuff just a little bit easier than it's ever been. So.
And they are all the questions about the general specifics of the game, end game, post-launch content, boss battles, all those really interesting parts of the game that we don't have an awful lot of information on at the moment. Hope you enjoyed this interview, this breakdown by Chris. Hopefully you learned something and are excited to Gamescom, where it's looking that we might find out some more information about some of this stuff at least. Thanks for watching, do subscribe if you'd like more Borderlands content, and see you soon. Take care.